What up, Wizards? It's Dev. You know, it's been a couple of weeks now since Mtg Foundations first came out. You know what that means. Previous season, baby. Let's look at some new cards today. Actually, no. No, we're not doing that today, thank God. It looks like the coast is clear on the spoiler front for the next 5 or 6 weeks, which is actually a good thing. We can take a step back, we can breathe for a moment, actually enjoy the cards from the set what just came out. Can you imagine? Rather than living in some nebulous future standard where we're always looking at new cards that we're going to get to play in 2 weeks, what if we actually just played with the cards from the set that just came out? Wild idea. It's a mindset I truly believe in. So now you know where I stand. Who's coming with me? Who's coming with me to look at cards? I'm not quitting or anything. You don't have to get up and go anywhere. We're going to look at cards today. We do a lot of that, but specifically today, we're going to look at cards from Mtg Foundations. All right. They're actually seeing some play in Standard because, yeah, it's only been a couple of weeks and it was an admittedly rocky start for Mtg Foundations. Some cards didn't really hit the mark we thought they were going to. Some cards didn't hit the bullseye so much as they completely missed the dartboard and hit an innocent bystander at the bar. So now that the smoke is settled and the dust is cleared a good bit, these cards are actually out and we've gotten to play with them some. What cards are actually seeing play in Standard from Foundations? Let's take a look.
And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech.
And we're back. Make sure you check out the Patreon, linked in the description. I have one of those. If you don't want to do all the Patreon stuff, I'm pretty sure you can leave a tip or something in the comments section. That'd be much appreciated this holiday season. But if you can't leave a tip, then let me know, because I think that means I have to turn it on or something. Anyway, we got to look at cards today. That is what we're all here for. That is the true reason for the season, is looking at Magic cards. So with that in mind, let's start with some honorable mentions. You know where you are. You know where you are. I've got 3 of them today, but I'm going to kind of speed through these, and it gives me an opportunity to tell you some of the criteria for this list, because every card except for the honorable mentions is a card that I've seen in some sort of actual tournament winning or league winning list. And with that in mind, let's tell you what these honorable mentions are. They're cards that I didn't see, cards I have not seen in tournament results so far, but have nonetheless generated some amount of buzz one way or the other, whether they created a whole new deck type or I just kind of see them in the arena all the stinking time. So with that in mind, I should probably start with Mazes In. This had a couple of articles written about it a couple of weeks ago, or at least a week ago, because it showed up in the 6-0 deck dump for MTG Arena on Wizards' website. Maybe 5-6 days ago, something like that. And even though it hasn't actually done anything in tournaments from what I've seen so far, it is a deck that's garnered a lot of attention in the early season here. I just included it in the top 3 new decks of the week a couple of days ago, but again, I haven't seen any real tournament results for Mazes In combo as a deck, but it's a deck a lot of people are talking about, so I figured I'd give it a small spotlight here. Apart from that, another similar deck and card from the new set that makes that whole deck a thing is Raise the Past. I just included this in the Aristocrats deck for a deck tech the other day, and it was fun in that. It's kind of like a resilient piece in the late game to get back a couple of guys, but it turns out that Raise the Past lets you do all kinds of funky combos with stuff, man, along with things like Hinterland Sanctifier, Life Creed Duo, Case of the Uneaten Feast, right? You just add Starscape Cleric to the mix, and by the end of the game, you're getting back 10, 15 creatures all at one time with Raise the Past, and you're doing it relatively early in the game, and you're getting all these life gain triggers that are converting into damage to your opponent from Starscape Cleric. So it's a neat little combo deck that I played on the arena a few times. I've seen people play it against me on the arena a few times. So it too is getting a little bit of attention in the early game here. But again, I haven't really seen this one finish well in any tournaments or leagues so far. Apart from that, my final honorable mention is one that I just brought up a second ago, and it's Hinterland Sanctifier. Not only is this in the Raise the Past deck, it's kind of an essential combo piece for the way most of those decks are built. You don't always see the Sanctifier Starscape Cleric package, but mostly these days. Either way, Hinterland Sanctifier is also just in all the mono-white life gain decks. It's in all the black-white life gain decks. I've seen it in multiple Rabbits decks. This thing is kind of popping up everywhere. It's hopping up everywhere without actually gaining any real foothold as far as tournament and league results go. Yeah, you see it on the arena a good bit, but as far as tournament results, it just doesn't pop up very much. It still deserves some love, though. The card is kind of everywhere except where it truly matters. You're in every club except the most exclusive ones, man, and I'm sorry for that. You'll make it one day. Either way, number 25, let's start the list, is another one-drop that I might not like quite as much, but I still like a whole lot, and I've seen it a whole lot more, and that's Infestation Sage. This isn't necessarily necessarily everywhere. As a matter of fact, the current arena experience, I see Sanctifier way more than I see Infestation Sage, but there have been a couple of small ball black-white decks or even blue-black decks some of the time that'll end up playing Infestation Sage in the early game as a 1-drop, and I have seen multiple of these decks 5-0 the league so far this season. This showed up a good bit at the beginning and has been slowly dropping off, which isn't a good sign for it, but again, at least it made its mark while it had a chance. That said, number 24 is Arcanus the Omnipotent, a reprint, sure, but this has been showing up in the Cauldron decks, a sort of sometimes Simic but mostly mono blue Agatha's Soul Cauldron deck, because it turns out that when you can just, give any of your creatures the ability to tap to draw 3 cards, it's pretty busted. Most of the time, you just never want to even resolve Arcanus in that deck. You just want it in your graveyard as quickly as possible, and there's plenty of ways to make that happen. So, neat little card here that has already done a thing in Standard, but not necessarily for the reasons that you might think it would do a thing. But, doing a thing is doing a thing. What counts, counts. The same could be said for Abyssal Harvester, number 23 here. I've only seen this in league results twice so far, and I haven't seen it beyond league results that memory serves. Maybe someone in a challenge was playing one of these, but now I cannot believe that was true. Either way, Abyssal Harvester is a cool card that I pointed out a couple of times during previous season, but didn't expect too much out of. It can get stuff out of your graveyard or your opponent's graveyard, so if you remove one of their guys or they discard a creature while this thing is in play and can tap down, they're kind of in a lot of trouble. It turns out, man, you just really got to watch your discards and such while this guy's in play, and it makes all of your removal spells that much better, especially the turn that you play them. So Abyssal Harvester has been kind of sweet so far this season, but hasn't shown up too often. That said, it has shown up, so he's on the list. Number 22 is Mystical Teachings, which I believe is on the list thanks to one player. This has gotten a League 5-0 twice in a sort of blue-black control deck, and I'm fairly certain it was the same player both times, so congratulations. You put Mystical Teachings on this list. This is a card I like a lot. I've played against and with it an awful lot back in the day. God, I was going to say just a few years ago. It was like 15 years ago. I was playing with and against Mystical Teachings, but this is still a beating of a Magic card, man. Like, it tutors twice. Once you've established control of the game state, just tutoring up a counterspell or a sweeper, and just in case they reestablish board state, or even just a single target removal spell some of the time is enough, but it can also just tutor up something that completely blows them out of the game, which is also a fun thing to do with it. Mystical Teachings is a very good card, but again, I've really only seen it in a couple of blue-black lists, and I'm pretty sure those lists were identical and played by the same person a few days back to back. So again, congratulations. But I was more than happy enough to put Mystical Teachings on the list. I think it belongs here. Number 21 is Swiftfoot Boots. Here's the deal. This never shows up as more than like a 1 or 2 of in any of the decks that I've seen it in, but weirdly, I've seen it in like 4 decks already. Mostly league results decks. This doesn't usually make the jump to standard challenge tournaments, but that said, in those league results decks, it looks like a really spicy include. The 2 decks that it tends to show up the most often in are Boros Mice or Boros Aggro of some kind. Anything playing Valiant dudes like Heartfire Hero, Emberheart Challenger, you'll often see Boots show up in. But this will also occasionally be a 1 or 2 of in like the blue-white Artifacts deck that plays like Zoetic Glyph, which is still clinging desperately to life, but it also got another new tool, not just this one, this season, that will actually talk about relatively soon. Very soon, actually. But Swiftfoot Boots, again, has shown up in a couple of different decks so far this season, and you can't say that about any other card we've talked about today. But number 20 is the Prince, man. Charming Prince showing up in a bunch of mono-white control decks and beyond. Not just that, man. Lately, we've all been partying like it's 2019. We were really trying to find a good white 2-drop ever since this has rotated, but nothing compares to you. You liking these Prince jokes? Prince wrote Nothing Compares to You, the Sinead O'Connor song. He wrote that. He also wrote Manic Monday by the Bengals. I know a lot of Prince facts. This actually, so far, I feel like has seen more play already than it did the first time it was in Standard. It didn't actually show up that much. We had Yorion back then, and the card didn't even show up that often, but it's everywhere in Standard at the moment, not just the Arena. Again, it's been in plenty of League 5-0s and mono-white control and decks like that, where it can blink Biza, Sanguine Evangelist, and a number of other creatures, but it's also shown up in an Orzhov mid-range list that played a Linda at the top end, and actually just got 7th place in a standard challenge. So the Prince actually, I believe, gets the distinction of being the first card on the list that I remember having seen so far this season in an actual standard challenge and not just a League 5-0. So good job, bud, man. Prince has always been a good card, and it looks like it's finally got the format to really do a thing. The next card is Little Red Corvette from Ether Drift. No, it's not. That's going to be a card in Ether Drift. Either way, no, the next card is actually number 19. It's Leyline Axe. This is not a handsome guy. This is a weapon of death. I was pretty sure this was going to do something in standard, but it did not end up where I thought it was going to. Once the roulette wheel stopped on this thing, it ended up in the blue-white artifacts deck. Again, that same one with Zoetic Glyph, but you'll often see the full 4 of in that deck because if you start with it in play, you got an artifact in play, which like the deck gets extra value out of just having another artifact super early in the game. Now you can Case of the Filched Falcon and actually solve the thing like much earlier, right? Now you can Zoetic Glyph the Axe on turn 3 if you got no better thing to do that with. Again, not surprised the card showed up, but a little bit surprised where it showed up, but I guess I shouldn't be. Number 18 is Maze Mind Tome, quietly doing work as always. The whole time it was in standard the last time, it was just a faithful, dependable, loyal card draw outlet for any deck. You don't have to have blue in the deck or anything like that. But towards the end of its reign in standard last time, even blue decks started playing the card. And I guess we didn't take that long to learn the lesson this time because mostly what I've seen this in is in blue-black mid-range decks. But I remember exactly how good this card was a couple of years back, and it doesn't surprise me that it still is. Number 17 and 16 are Demonic Pact and Harmless Offering, respectively, although it doesn't have to be respectively. It could really, 17 could be Harmless Offering and 16 could be Demonic Pact. It really doesn't matter. These cards go together. This showed up again, just like a couple of other cards we've already talked about, towards the beginning of the season in a few lists, and I have not really seen those lists do super well in standard in the last 5 or 6 days of MTGO results, but there was at least one standard challenge that this put 2 decks in the top 16 of. Just watch out for this deck. It's still good. It's got a lot of dimension to it. It's not just a combo deck. It's got plenty of tutors in it. It's got like Urabrass Forward so it can solo mono black decks and stuff like that. Just a sick little deck that actually, again, attacks at a bunch of different angles and just happens to have this combo in it. Number 15 is Como World Eater, which has really established its place immediately in the Reanimator decks. There's still, Atraxa. We see Atraxa every day. We still see Valgavoth every day. That's a good card too. But increasingly, we will see Atraxa cut to play Coma, or we'll just see the number of reanimatable dudes go up to 10, and 2 of those guys are Coma. I've been playing Coma myself in like a Sultai Reanimator list this season, and she is really good because that deck can just cast her, especially if you can reanimate it on like turn 4 or 5. It's going to take all of their mana to even think about removing it, and even then they probably can't. So, just a ridiculous magic card that's very easy to stick and very tough to actually get rid of. So, again, I can see why it has taken its place in the Reanimator decks. And yeah, Reanimator is very much back. More on that in a minute, but for now, let's look at 14, which is Alinda the Dusk Rose. Not only did that show up in the Orzhov deck that got like 7th place in a standard challenge, right? This is more or less the top end of that deck. And it looked like it did really well in that deck. Yeah, you're a low to the ground deck and you don't necessarily want to play 4-drops. But if you were forced to play a 4-drop, this is exactly the one you'd want to. And they do, and they win. Speaking of Life Gain, number 13 is another little lifelink thing, and it's a Sunblessed Healer, which is somehow better than Alinda. I don't know how that happened, but this has shown up in way more decks than just about any other card. This is shown up in more decks than any card on the list so far, man. Again, this has some spread in terms of what it actually ends up in, but it's mostly in mono white decks. That said, this too, and this deck is becoming a real focal point in this video, I fear, but this too was in that Orzhov mid-range deck that top 8'd that standard challenge a few days back. But that said, it's been in a bunch more decks than just the Orzhov deck, and it's been in more decks than just the mono white deck. This is popping up in a couple of different places right now, because if you just pay 2 mana for it, it's a 3-power lifelinker. Good deal. If you pay 4 mana for it, it gets back some of the most important cards in your deck. And by the way, it's just permanence and stuff. You don't have to get back a creature with this. You can get back an enchantment with this, and that's totally fine, and the rules don't say you can't. So this has been doing tons of stuff in standard so far, and even though it doesn't show up in every pile, it's shown up in just enough piles that it's almost a top 10 card at this point, man. This is not one that was on a whole lot of people's radar, but it's cleaning up so far. Number 12, on the other hand, is one that was on everyone's radar, and it's Maelstrom Pulse. Showing up is mostly a one-of in the Golgari decks, but Golgari is one of the top, 2 or 3 decks in the entire format right now. It's definitely S tier at the moment, man. So you knew they were going to add this card, and they did. But at this point, there are so many Golgari decks in Standard that I see this card in tournament results more or less every day. Numbers 11 and 10, I may as well batch together, even though it seems wrong. Right, because I'm supposed to do the 11, the honorable mention for the top 10, and we're in the top 10 now, everybody. I'm supposed to do all that, but I guess I'll forego it this video because numbers 11 and 10 have been showing up in more or less the same decks. And don't serve the same purposes, but you'll get what I'm saying when I actually show you the cards. Dev, do it. 11 is Opt, and 10 is Unsummon. The only reason that they're in this order, and I think they should be, is because Unsummon is seeing play in just a couple of more decks than Opt. Opt is mostly in these, blue-white helping hand decks that try to get an Oculus onto the table on turn 2 or 3 or some ungodly practice like that. It's ridiculous what those decks are doing, but still, man, Opt is showing up as a 4-of in those, as well as the various, mono blue tempo decks that aren't really doing too much, but a couple of decks that have been doing well so far are like Teamer Otters, I guess is the best thing to call it, and then the Simic Beanstalk deck that plays Tolarian Terror. Often that deck will also play like a 4-of Opt. If it's not playing the 4-of sleight of hand. So again, Opt is showing up in a good number of places right now, but Unsummon is showing up in slightly more because it's in all the aforementioned decks from, the Simic Tolarian Terror to the Teamer Otters decks to the Mono Blue decks, just about anything that can gain tempo or wants to gain some tempo is playing some number of Unsummons, and even some decks that were exclusively playing a 4-of Into the Floodmaw have decided to play Unsummon instead because Unsummon can save their own creatures, whereas Floodmaw can't. My number 9 is Day of Judgment here. This is actually kind of tough because it felt like this should have been like number 15, but again, it's shown up in just enough decks, even though it hasn't shown up in a varied number of decks. This is mostly in the mono-white control decks. Occasionally, when a blue-white control deck does 5-0 a league or something, it'll show up in those almost every time. But the problem is it doesn't show up in mono-white every time, but it does show up enough that I wanted to put it here in the list and in the top 10 too. Again, I feel like it's been a kind of important addition to the mono white control decks as of late. A 4-drop sweeper is something they had access to before, but they didn't want to give their opponent a clue token or do something else good for them. Day of Judgment is the first mono white 4-mana sweeper in a good long time. I know it's a reprint, right, but a good long time in Standard at least, that doesn't benefit the opponent in some stupid way, right? So it's just nice to have a good clean sweep like Day of Judgment, and a lot of the mono white control decks have taken advantage of that. Plus, not only blue white, but like the red white Urabras Forge decks will play it as well. But again, it's mostly made its mark in the mono white deck and been one of the only cards that it's really picked up in most of its forms from Foundations. My number 8 is Zombify, y'all, man. Like I said, Reanimator's back, dude. Like, we got Rite of the Moth a couple of sets ago in Duskmourn, and I really like that card. I saw it all over the arena, and I saw it in League 5-0 results a couple of times, but it never really got the baseline support that it needed to be a real deck, so far at least, in Standard since Duskmourn came out. Zombify, on the other hand, man, this is all play in the first League results that we got after the set came out, and it's still seen play in League results, and for that matter, Standard challenges, whether it's Sultai Reanimator, Esper Reanimator, Orzhov Reanimator, Blue-Black Reanimator, which is probably the most played of all of these that I've seen so far. One thing this has over Rite of the Moth is that it's so much easier to cast. It doesn't lock you into Orzhov, and the ability for, Reanimator decks to be green-black, or again, especially blue-black, has really made Zombify in some ways a better card, or at least a more played card, than Rite of the Moth at this point in the season. So, hey, I for one welcome our Zombified Overlords, man. I'm really happy to have this card back in Standard, and it's already doing stuff, and it will continue to do so. Now, I'm going to cheat super hard here and lump 7, 6, and 5 sort of together, but I'll do them all separately. Why not? I'll throw you that bone. Number 7 is Bolt Wave, which has shown up more than enough, but it hasn't shown up as much as 6 or 5. You'll see what I mean in just a second, but needless to say, we all knew Bolt Wave would show up. I don't think this is surprising anybody. It's good. Good card, man. Lava Spike, but it's not Lava Spike. So it's showing up in the mono red decks and occasionally the Boros decks. But you know what else is showing up in the Boros decks? Boros Charm. Again, it just makes all the sense in the world. This was a fairly easy list to put together when you think about it. Boros Charm has been sort of one of the big bases. Is that correct? One of the bases for these like Boros aggro decks that are experiencing a resurgence, right? When Dustmourne came out, we saw these optimistic scavenger Shard Mage's rescue decks that got adapted into sort of absorbing part of the mono red decks, right? Or, at least we saw some of the mono white enchantments package get adopted by the mono red decks. Probably a better way to put that. But, you'd see Emberheart Challenger, Monastery Swiftspear, and Monstrous Rage in the same deck as Ethereal Armor and Shard Mage's rescue. And Boros Charm has really become the glue that gives you an actual reason to tie those two themes together. It's pretty easy to see why Boros Charm is seeing play, but above all else, the best of any of these cards so far has been Burst Lightning. You probably knew this was coming. I'd already done Bolt Wave, I've already done Boros Charm, I told you they all go together. So, hence, Burst Lightning. This has shown up in inarguably the most decks of just about any card on the entire list this season. So maybe it should be number one, but I thought it would be a little boring in the number one slot. But again, this is not only in mono red, but it's also in those red-white decks, those Gruul lists that we see. It's in basically everything that runs mountains, and some decks are even cutting Torch the Tower to fit this card right now, depending on how aggro they are. Burst Lightning, again, is maybe the single most played new card from Foundations. It's a reprint, yes, but it does compete with at least one other card in terms of how much play it's actually seeing, but we'll get to that card in just a moment. First, we got to do number 4, which is Authority of the Consuls. Not only is this kind of the premier sideboard card from the set so far, and yeah, like Crystal Barricade has shown up in Pioneer already, but this isn't a list for Pioneer, it's a list for Standard. But as far as sideboard cards go, Authority of the Consuls is kind of the king or queen, not sure, but this is just kind of in every sideboard with planes, and a lot of decks have planes, man. This just completely shuts down not only mono red, but more or less anything looking to attack you in the early game, but especially mono red. If you hate Screaming Nemesis, this might be the card for you, and a lot of people have realized that already, so it is showing up. Unlike your dad, sorry, it is showing up. But let's get into the top 3 here. Number 3 is a weird one, but it's one that's popping up more and more over this last week here, and that is Soulstone Sanctuary, a card that I didn't love when I first saw it. When this becomes a creature, it stays a creature forever. So, now they can lay down arms that are any other sorcery speed removal. It gets hit by a sweeper and it's dead. A Planeswalker ability can kill it now, or target it at least. And these are all things I kind of hate. But you know what this card is? You know what this card actually is? This card is a demon. Because once it's a creature, it's all creature types. A lot of people have compared this to Mutavault already, which is a comparison that makes sense, and I also hate. Again, nowadays it shows up in just about everything that plays Annex, and again, just about every deck that doesn't play mountains plays swamps, right? Unless you're mono white, right? But just about every deck that doesn't play mountains plays swamps, and the decks that play swamps all play Unholy Annex. So you want to be a demon. It's a good life. If you are a standard Magic card and you want to see some play, be a demon. It helps. So, especially a demon that starts life as a land that you don't pay any mana for. It's good. But either way, number 2 is Kiora. I just mentioned that if you don't play mountains, you probably play swamps. Yes, there's a mono white deck. Turns out there's also a blue-white Helping Hand deck. And this is basically the new card from Foundations that deck has been able to fold the most into their strategy. I was pretty sure this card would see some play in that deck, although sparing. But no, it's just an immediate 2 to 3 of in that deck now, because if it attacks even once, then you've got yourself an 8/8. But it's not just that, the ETB on this is really good in that deck because it puts cards in your graveyard. You can put your Oculus in your graveyard that way and then Helping Hand it out. You get to see more cards from your deck, so you're drawing into the Helping Hand faster with the ETB trigger. Just really good stuff, man. Really good stuff. And in a pinch, you can even reanimate this with like a recommission or something and get in with it multiple turns in a row with flying. But not only that, she too shows up in these Reanimator lists. And not only are the Zombify lists kind of popping off, but like I said, a lot of those lists are blue-black. So, turn 3 Kiora, turn 4 Zombify, you feel good. all in all about that play. But Kiora's also in a number of other decks that want to mill themselves right now. These decks you see in the arena. But she's, again, making her mark, not only in League 5.0s and stuff like that, but actual standard challenges. She's popped up more than enough times to be my number 2. But number 1 is Llanowar Elves. I really didn't want to belabor it here because, you probably knew it. And if you didn't call it beforehand, as soon as I said Llanowar Elves, you're like, oh, yeah. Sure, that makes sense. I think this deserves the number 1 slot. Who didn't see it coming? I'm pretty sure we could all call this one, right? But it just was going to be the best card in the set, and it definitely is. I think this benefited a little bit from everyone knowing how good it was. We didn't have the attitude like, oh, we'll test this out, see if it goes in this thing. Nah, just like Burst Lightning, we know exactly where this goes. We know where to port it into, and it's done that. It's in the Golgari decks, and honestly, Llanowar Elves is probably the best reason to put forests in your swamp deck instead of islands. Again, Dimir has a lot of advantages, and honestly, the Dimir decks are performing better results-wise than the Golgari decks. But if you are going to put forests in that black deck, again, Llanowar Elves is probably the absolute best reason why, whether you're casting Unstoppable Slasher or Preacher of the Schism on turn 2, ! Unholy Annex on 2, seems okay as well. Just a lot of good stuff. Archfiend of the Dross on turn 3. My God. Llanowar Elves is doing so much for that deck right now. But obviously, it's also putting a new lease on, these ramp decks. There's a fair number of green X, mostly green-black or green-blue ramp decks in Standard right now. Even green-red, like the Gruul Surprise decks, are leveraging Llanowar Elves to become much, much better than they previously were. And that's not the only decks they're playing. The Simic, tempo deck, right? Both the Temur Tempo deck and the Simic Tempo deck will play Llanowar Elves as a 4 of as well. There's really no overestimating how much a 1-mana ramp piece can do for your deck. Forests have never seen so much play in Standard over the last 5 years as they have over the last 2 weeks. Because freaking Llanowar Elves are back, man. You want green to be playable? Print Llanowar Elves. But that is, of course, Itski Lewitsky. Just join me in the comments section and let me know how you felt about all the stuff that went on in this video. All the little bits and whatnot. Just any card that should have made the list, you think. But again, remember, I'm not talking about what you see on Arena every day. I'm talking about what actually shows up in tournament results and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so now we got that set. What maybe should you have put on the list? Either way, do all the things down there. Like the video on your way out. Before you hit the lights, hit the likes. It's the one shaped like a thumb. You could also sub to the sandwich. I need more subs. Yum, yum, yum. But you could also check out the Patreon. That's the last thing I'm going to ask you to do. There's a link in the description for that. That would mean so freaking much this holiday season if you did that. Again, explore the option of leaving a tip down there in the comment section. If you can't do it, comment that you can't do it. I probably need to fix that. But again, that is Allski Kowalski, Itski Lewitsky, and I'm donezo for this one's us. I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from the place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.